good morning, everyone. Welcome to another episode of CalTV. Today, myself, Mike Marseglia, and our guest for today, Jared Glover of CapSen Robotics. We're going to talk a little bit about Jared, his company, and something that his company does that's very special to the industry and everyone's pretty excited about. So, Jared, welcome, and glad to see you again. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Jared Glover, CEO and co-founder of CapSen Robotics.
Excellent. Tell us a little bit about CapSen, like how. Actually, one of the things that somebody first asked is the name and how it got started, number of employees. Give me a little history.
Yeah, sure. So we've been around for close to 9 years now. We started right after I finished my PhD at MIT, and I've been doing research in 3D vision and robotic manipulation for over 2 decades now. Most of it in universities before the company. But then I got my former boss from financial company I worked at between my master's and PhD to come to Pittsburgh and start this company with me. And we looked around for quite a while. We looked at needs in the industry for probably close to 2 years before we settled on bin picking as sort of the main product we were going to offer. Because what we found is that there were opportunities to use 3D vision, right? How do you get robots to understand where things are? There's opportunities to use 3D vision in a lot of different places, but you really wanted something that you could offer as a complete solution in the industry, right? And so it's not enough to just say, oh, here's some fancy software that will tell you where things are and help you, give the robot a little bit of extra intelligence in one aspect. You really need to solve an entire solution for the industry. And so, we can get into this more later, but we've worked to not only provide the software capabilities for robots to do bin picking, which means the 3D vision and the motion planning. But, we get heavily involved, as you know, in our work with you guys, we get heavily involved in the installations, working on end effectors and the customizations around each application, which is really what we focused on becoming the best at. And sorry, you asked about the name as well. So the name is CapSen. The origin is from Latin capio and sensus, which roughly means to understand the senses.
Excellent.
So very much heavy like computer vision focus to begin with, and then we've kind of taken that and expanded that over time.
Excellent. That's a great name. And how many employees does CapSen have at the moment?
We have 9 people right now. Still pretty small.
But 9 people that do an awful lot. I know how fast you guys react to requests for testing. So they're very well utilized. Let's put it that way.
When we first started working with you, I think we were half that size. So
that's right.
Yeah, we do a lot with a little.
Okay. And then your locations. I know you're located in Pennsylvania. Whereabouts specifically?
Yeah, we're in Pittsburgh. So I grew up in Pittsburgh. I love the town, but what people don't necessarily know more generally is that we have like more robotics companies and robotics people per capita than any other city in the world, including places in Japan and Europe and West Coast and Boston. Like Pittsburgh has a really, really high concentration of robotics talent and companies, really stemming from Carnegie Mellon University here. That's where it all started. A lot of robotic technologies. You look at different mapping technologies, SLAM, mobile robotics, autonomous vehicles, all of that was invented here in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon. So it's no surprise that there's this industry growing up around it. But, you don't often hear about Pittsburgh mentioned with big startup and business communities like that.
Jared, you're absolutely right. I think in my past life, whenever I think of Pittsburgh, or most people think of it, they think of football, they think of steel mills, They think of heavy industry, but they do not think of that highest per capita number of robotics engineers, which is actually amazing, quite amazing.
Right.
It's a testament to what that city's doing. Fantastic. So, one thing I know is, you hear a lot of buzzwords in the industry over time, and as things, filter their way up and bubble up to where they hit a magazine, or I'll use the Today Show as that litmus test. Once something hits Today Show status, it's saturated. A lot of people know about it. The industry's well versed in it, and then and they're talking about it in more general terms. But for some of our audience, maybe that's some are very technical, some are less technical. Give us, for example, the Today Show version of what 3D bin picking is all about for you guys. How does that actually work?
So it seems like something that you would expect robots have been doing for decades, but bin picking means you've got a pile of objects in a bin or a box, spread out at random, piled on top of each other. Could be any kind of objects, could be little metal screws or medical packages or all kinds of things. And it's just a task of getting them out of the bin one at a time with a robot arm. Seems pretty straightforward, but because the objects are in random positions, they're pushing up next to each other, and the robot has to go in and pick them up differently every time. It was quite a challenge for the industry to solve. I mean, as I'm sure you know, even better than I do, Mike, that it took quite a while for the industry to really get this problem solved. And even now, there's still applications in bin picking that are just not economical or still very challenging. So it's one of those things for the layman that it's kind of surprising that this is even a cutting edge technology, but basically it's really cutting edge still at this point.
Well, I know you and I both are aware that anywhere where you go to trade show and people look at bin picking, everyone wants to talk about it. They want to understand, here's my pile of parts and how do I perceive this and pick that up. So, I mean, from a system perspective, how it's architected, I see a robot, I see an end effector, a gripper of some sort. I see there's some kind of perception hardware, and then you have the magic black box that CapSen has that has their software in it. Is that pretty much it for a bin picking application? I mean, it sounds simple, but it's not. I understand.
That's it for the basic version. I think one thing that has held bin picking back in a lot of applications is that if there was a person there doing the bin picking job, which there still are in most bin picking applications out there, there's a person doing the bin picking. They're doing something with the part after they get it out of the bin. They're not just putting it down on a conveyor belt most of the time. They're picking it up and they're assembling it with some other component, or they're inspecting it, or they're packaging it in some complicated way. And so for a long time, I think bin picking has been feasible for some parts, simpler parts, for over 10 years now. We've been doing it for about 5 years. But what's really challenging in a lot of cases is how do you get the robot to do everything that person would be doing? How do you get the robot to do more complicated things with the objects after they get picked out of the bin? So our first bin picking application, for example, was picking hooks out of a bin. And that alone was hard enough because the hooks are very complicated shapes and hard to detect. But then also, when you pick one up, you don't usually just get one because they're hooked on each other, they're tangled. And so the motion planning system had to figure out how do you pick it in such a way and then turn it in such a way that you're disentangling them from the other ones that might be hanging on. And then there were more steps in the task. We had to place it on a fixture and pick it up again in a different way so that it could go and be inserted into a press that would flatten one end as part of a larger assembly process. So that whole task, took several steps, and it was not just the core vision technology and motion planning technology to go pick up the part, but everything that happens after, including some custom hardware for the fixture you're putting it down on and doing something with that afterwards.
Would you say that as a customer, if I come to you, that one of the challenges for you, it sounds like the bin picking aspect or the perception and finding objects and grasping them is one thing, and then everything that happens afterwards is an entire different section of the project, right? Where it has to be thought out properly and maybe with the right sensors.
Sometimes it's separate, but oftentimes it's very connected because the finger design affects what you can do with it afterwards, right? And so we're working on an application right now for a big auto parts company that's repack. So we have to pick auto parts out of cardboard boxes with dividers, and then place them. It's kind of a silly task, but we're placing them in totes with dividers, just rotated in a different way in a different container. But it's a process that happens a lot in the auto industry and some others, I guess. But the challenge is that depending on your finger design, it might prevent you from placing it in the tote in the way that you want to, or you might you might collide with the edge of something or the other parts, and there's like no touch areas on the objects. So like the finger design gets very tricky, and you have to think about the whole task, not just the bin picking separately, unless you're literally just gonna do the bin pick and then hand it off to another robot, which is an option sometimes, but then it's more cost and more space.
So, Jared, as a customer or somebody curious about how you approach things, would it be safe to say then that you also do contribute to or actually design the robot grippers or end effectors for one of these tasks?
Yeah, oftentimes we're the ones designing it. Obviously, in our work with you, I think you guys did the preliminary designs. And that's a lot easier when they're simpler picking tasks where you can use suction, like we've used with medical objects.
Right.
But when you're talking about finger design with grippers and very precise shapes for the fingers, and thinking about how that finger design affects the other steps of the task, it's usually better if we're responsible for that and coordinate the software customization with the finger design.
How much of each application would you say is custom, and how much relies on your off-the-shelf, starting base software?
So the software is fairly standardized at this point. We still do add new capabilities to the software from time to time. So, for the repack project, for example, we added some new vision capabilities and capabilities to pick and place from these very structured grid, boxes instead of just jumbled boxes like we've done before. But then, once you've got that capability, that's just a capability that all of our customers can use. It's not like that's a one-off. So the software stuff is quite standardized, but the the customization is mostly on the hardware side. We've designed our software to have a user interface that makes it easy to customize the steps of the application. And we have non-programmers doing that customization here, and we're going to be training our partners to do that as well, and some of the end users to do the programming of the system, if you will, which is not real programming, configuring the system. But depending on the application, if it's a simple suction pick and place task, then it could just take a week or two to configure and get the hardware right for it. But if you're talking about one of these really complicated, like the hook picking application, that could take a few months to really engineer everything and make it solid.
Great, appreciate that answer. Definitely, there's every application has its own specialty unto itself. But I know you guys have been able to, just a testament to how more standard your software has been, is how quickly you can respond when we throw some parts at you and ask you, what do you think of these? How did this look, right? What are our chances with these parts? So we appreciate that. Actually, another question I have for you is 3D bin picking has been, again, one of those other buzzwords along with AI for so long, right? And now AI seems to be to the forefront. But I'll say that in the last several years, I've seen, and with the industry that we're in, we see a lot of other pop up and competing technologies and Me Too's and sort of likes, where something might be just someone approaches it from the form of, hey, we have this great 3D bin picking camera, which we know that the camera doesn't actually do all of it; it's just part of it. So with all of these competing technologies popping up everywhere, how do you just continue to differentiate CapSen above all that, and just keep your head above all the rest that way?
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. There are quite a few competitors now. We don't typically face competition though when we bid projects. It's kind of interesting. We have maybe once or twice, and when we have, we've come out on top so far. But really, I think there's so many different applications out there that it really is about the customization and the support that we provide, and the fact that we're the only company like us in our region, right? So there's a couple out on the West Coast, there's a few in Europe, several in Asia, but we're really unique in this region with the types of technology and services that we provide. And so we just double down on that, right? So we focus on having the fastest software, being able to do these more complicated manipulations that we talked about. But then really what it boils down to, aside from just being able to do the job, because usually those parts are just part of the spec, right? It's like you have to meet a certain cycle time. You have to be able to manipulate this thing that's complicated maybe. That's just part of the spec. But then really what the differentiator comes down to in practice is our willingness and ability to customize and support the project and just make sure that it all comes together and works well at the end. It continues working as the customer makes changes.
Excellent. So I think I want to go back just a moment to when we described what a 3D picking application does. One thing that was very interesting, I think, of note that I want to make sure we let everyone know is that someone would ask, and I remember the first conversation I ever had with you said, okay, where do you pick up and I leave off? Like, how much programming do I need to do? Like, do I have to do robot programming on this cell? And what was your answer to that?
So far, you haven't had to at all, right? So we just take all of the programming, and again, that's part of the customization and support that we provide for our partners. We'll program the whole cell with our software, and our software takes control of all the devices around the robot too. So we can send commands to the PLC, we control the cameras, we execute the motions on the robot. We're not just saying, oh, here's what a path you could take with the robot, and then you have to implement that. We take full control and do all the programming. Now, that being said, our user interface has come a long way since we've started working together even. And so we're looking to train our partners and end users to do some of that programming on their own now. But it's completely up to you. I mean, if you want to do more of it, we'll teach you how, and we can get started on that. But we can also continue to do all of it ourselves too, whatever makes sense for the project.
Yeah, we appreciate the work you guys have put into making this, I'll call it, more user-friendly and easier to go through into a configuration mode versus actual software writing. And that's obviously important to all your end customers as well. Another thing comes to mind, as again, you've been doing this for 9 years, you've been doing, CapSen for 5, and there's so much that you've learned about perception and seeing different applications. You have this great tool in your hands. You must have looked at other applications for your technology that are not just bin picking. Something, let's call it outside the box, right? No pun intended.
Yeah, so that's actually literally we're picking outside the box because we're starting to pick the actual bins and boxes that objects go in now. And so we've been moving more into some warehousing applications where we are putting arms on mobile robots and they're driving around flow racks and stacking and destacking. Mostly we're focused on totes right now. That's the first thing that we've really focused on as a niche. But we're going to be working more on boxes as well and trying to make it more general. I think there's a huge unfilled need in the industry right now for general purpose box manipulation in warehouses. And there's boxes in factories too, but warehouses are where the giant need is. You've got these case pickers, people entirely that are just pulling around, forklifts and pallets. They're pulling them around and filling orders, getting 5 of this case and 10 of these, and building mixed pallets around these logistics centers. And there's a huge opportunity to automate that work. There's so many labor shortages right now, and going to continue to be, that it's a problem that's going to be solved by robots before too long. And we do have some advantages, but we're definitely looking for partners to help us scale that quickly.
That's good to hear. It sounds like what you should be doing. You're selling solutions and not a product. You're selling an actual solution. And there's a lot of applications like that out there. The mixed palletizing, mixed depal, also call it disorganized or random palletizing, random depalletizing. You never know what's coming up. That perception, that the experience you have in perception and the box world inside the box definitely leverages that way. So I'm glad to hear you guys are venturing outside of that box. Good to hear. And into mobile robotics as well, which is fantastic. Anyways, at this point, anything else that you want to tell us about CapSen that we haven't already talked about? I just want to make good use of your time today.
Yeah, I think we've touched on all the major points. I mean, we've been just so happy to have you guys as a partner. It's been just fantastic. The amount that you've taught us about how to operate, and the opportunities you've brought us, and really looking to grow our business together in whatever ways we can.
Likewise, great partnership so far. Looking forward to more. And of course, we're not the only people you work with. So I'd like to just give you an opportunity now, just to let everyone know that might be listening or watching. What's a great way to get a hold of CapSen if you want to have an application you want to talk about, or just want to talk in general about the industry?
The best way is just to go to our website, capsenrobotics.com, and check out the applications that we work on. We're going to be adding some new content. We have a few new landing pages there to talk about applications, and we're going to be adding more case studies and so on over the next few months. And just go to the Contact Us page, and that'll come to one of us, and we'll get started.
Excellent. Thanks, Jared. And to everybody watching and listening, appreciate you paying attention to another episode of CalTV, and to Jared and CapSen Robotics. Looking forward to big things from his company in the future. And thanks again. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for having me.